Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and this is part 2 of a series that I'm doing on the intersection between ayahuasca and astrology. Now, I'm doing this series because a lot of people ask me over time to share my experiences with both subjects, or the kind of intersection between both subjects. If you watch the first part of this video, which I recommend doing first, you know that I spent about 10 years of my life drinking ayahuasca, and astrology actually sort of blossomed out of those experiences. So the first video, what I did was tried to talk about what is ayahuasca, what is it used for, how long did I use it, what effects did it have on me practically, and also how did it sort of shift my paradigm. In this video, what I'm going to be talking about in part 2 today is more specifically, how did ayahuasca point me to astrology and also yoga to a certain extent? And then secondarily, how specifically did ayahuasca start accompanying my education in astrology? Because for a good amount of the early years of actually studying and learning astrology, I was participating in ayahuasca ceremonies quite regularly. And so the plant medicine actually played a role in teaching me astrology. I wouldn't say it was anything unique or special. As I said in the first part of this video series, anyone who's studying something really regularly, whether it's yoga or you could be, a carpenter, ayahuasca has a way of really shifting your relationship with the things that you practice or study or spend a lot of time doing. It'll naturally sort of comment on them and fill you with different insights and wisdom, so to speak. So this is not like some kind of unique thing that happened to me. A lot of people experience something similar when they drink ayahuasca. In part 3 of this series, just so that you have a sneak preview, I'm going to be talking about the virtues or benefits of psychedelics for spiritual life or astrology in general, as well as the potential pitfalls, because the purpose of the series is definitely not to exalt psychedelic use as though it's a cure-all or the answer or anything like that. Some people, they serve a great purpose for healing and learning and growth, especially in religious sacred settings. And for other people, sometimes they are unfortunately can be very detrimental. So it's not, I have an overall positive view of the potential for psychedelic medicine and entheogens, but I also am no longer using them in my life. And so I'll talk more about those complexities in the final installation, the third part of this series. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how ayahuasca started pointing me towards astrology in particular. Well, it's partly the medicine and it's partly the environment in which I was drinking the medicine. So early on, I was drinking ayahuasca in an environment in South America where there was a traditional lineage of Peruvian healers who worked with ayahuasca and who also were training and teaching several Westerners. And one of the Westerners happened to be a full-time practicing astrologer. Now, I've never met him in person, interestingly enough, but I've corresponded with him quite a bit over time here and there. And in a roundabout way, it was his presence there that got me into astrology. One of my friends that I went with actually did meet him. Him and I was my best friend. We went to the lodge together, drank ayahuasca, had these life-changing experiences, got back to the United States, and my friend ended up going back on his own at another point when I couldn't join him, at which point he met the apprentice who was the astrologer, got him interested in astrology. And when he came back, he recommended a book that the shaman's apprentice, this Western astrologer, had recommended to him. I read that book. I think it was called Swami Kriyananda's Sun Signs. And it just immediately, it felt like, rediscovering a long lost friend. I was instantly hooked. And from that point forward, progressively became more and more absorbed and interested in astrology. So in a sense, it wasn't even the medicine itself. It was the way that the medicine wove, me together with other people who are at the lodge. That's not, those are the people who, this is some of the people who were making the medicine and participating in the ceremonial psychic space of that place that I was in. And so through my friend and through this other person, this shaman in training and who was an astrologer, a longtime professional astrologer, I sort of took up interest that way. But that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that I was in a ceremony, one of my first ceremonies. I can never remember if it was the first, second, or third, but it was one of my first 3 ceremonies. And I had this experience with the moon. And basically, there was two parts of the story. One is that my arm was resting in some water, and I had spilled a cup, and I was in a completely altered state of consciousness, completely out of my body. My arm was laying in a cup of in water that had fallen onto the floor of the mesa. So then the moonlight was streaming in, and I could see the moonlight, and it had rained in the jungle that night too, so it was kind of damp, and there was moonlight. And what was so interesting about this was that I started having this almost like a mandala or a tapestry of lunar images in this completely altered like dimension. And I mean, just I can't even begin to describe, because it was so elaborate. And if you've ever been in an ayahuasca ceremony before, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's just a mandala of like mythic, archetypal, moving images, spirits, patterns. And these patterns were all lunar in nature, though I did not yet realize it. So, for example, I saw a crab, the sign of Cancer, the constellation associated with the moon's temple. I saw goddesses. I saw the ocean. So there was this. I saw mothers and labor and delivery and birth and children and breastfeeding and breasts and just like all sorts of like mother goddess, imagery. But it was all very silvery and kind of blue, silver, white. And so it was this incredible like lunar mandala. And I'd never seen anything like it. And I realized at this point, just spontaneously, just just like when you have that aha moment, I realized my arm, my human physical arm, is in a pool of water from this cup that I knocked over. The moonlight is streaming in, and it's wet. It's like jungly, rainy, wet. And then simultaneously, I had this image or memory of myself reading, going to get allergy shots when I was a kid at the doctor's office down the street from where I lived. And there was these like teen magazines, which I never would have been caught dead carrying, because I thought at the time that they were really quite girly. Sorry. I was like, not ever, I'm going to go out dead with like a poppy, with like whoever it was on the cover. Like, I think it was probably like Jonathan Taylor Thomas from Home Improvement or something. Like those old, like young, like 14-year-old heartthrobs. And I would turn to the Zodiac section where you could check your forecast, and I would read it. And it was kind of taboo because, I was the preacher's kid, not like horoscopes were really around in my house, and certainly not in the church. And it was a teen magazine, and there wasn't the internet, so, but I took a great interest in them. And I remembered reading one that said, I'm a Cancer sun, and that I'm a moon child because of this, because Cancer is the sign of the moon. And that memory of secretively, reading that magazine in the doctor's waiting room, and of reading my Cancer horoscope, and of being a moon child, all like flooded back as I realized that this lunar mandala was connected to the moonlight and to my arm in water. Unbelievable. Blew my mind. I mean, completely blew my mind, because suddenly in that moment, there was something to astrology that was absolutely tangible and real and deeply embedded in nature, in the psyche, in these alternative, like almost like alternative, like archetypal realms of consciousness. And so that's like, and that was one of like thousands of experiences that I had where the archetypal imagery of an ayahuasca ceremony would correspond directly to a planet or a combination of planets or a house or a sign or something like that. They grew and developed over time as I started more intentionally immersing myself in astrology. But that happened prior to me even knowing that like astrology was a thing. And that happened prior to me even reading that book on sun signs by Swami Kriyananda that the Shaman's Apprentice recommended to my friend, who then recommended to me. That was before all of that. And in fact, in the very beginning, I didn't even think it was that significant of an experience. It was only because it wasn't like, consciously, that was like a mind-blowing experience, but it still wasn't until I read Swami Kriyananda's sun signs and started getting interested in astrology and that was like maybe a year after that experience or two, that I started retrospectively being like, oh, wow, there's a thread here. I started having astrological visions astrologically themed visions, and then got interested in someone in the lodge who was into astrology. So it was all, to me, ended up feeling very much a part of the unfolding, karma and destiny line of my life. That was one of the first things that did it for me, and I just use that as an example because it's one of the most critical turning points I can think of. But in an ayahuasca ceremony, like this big story that I've just told, that all happened over the course of like 6 to 8 hour experience where images and experiences like that were moving like a roller coaster. You know what I mean? So it's hard to even like I'm sort of like artificially telling the stories in some way, because if you've ever been in an ayahuasca ceremony, you know that these things can move, just like the experiences are very fluid. So anyway, this was one particular gem that crystallized and really stayed with me. Now, eventually, so what happened was I started studying astrology more formally meaning intentionally buying books, texts, etc., and starting to learn how to cast charts and things like that, all self-study. And online at that, at this point, this is probably what 2006 by this time. And so gradually started kind of taking off like this. And I'm still drinking ayahuasca, right? So as I'm studying more, then the ayahuasca gradually started teaching me astrology. Now, and I don't mean like, sit down, you're so great, let me teach, you're the chosen one, let me teach you astrology. It was like nothing like that, right? It was just like I had people like yoga teachers who were learning profound things about yoga. And actually I should mention that too, like, so it'll teach you anyone who's learning something, it'll just plug right into what you're absorbed in and work with you on that. It's very illuminating in that regard. So anyway, I learned a bit of yoga from this experience too. One time, I realized that in order to deal with the insane amount of turbulence, I was just learning ways of sitting, positioning myself, straight spine. And at one point I had taken a mudra, and it was just, really simple mudra with my fingers. And I realized, oh, this sign that I'm holding, right? Like the little, like this, these, and I'm sitting and I'm breathing and I've got my legs crossed, right? And I've done this naturally. It's not like I'm posing or posturing. Somehow my body, I'm out of my mind. I'm completely out of my body, but I'm just trying to sit. And fingers had found their ways into a mudra, and legs were in the lotus position. And I realized I have assumed a position that I have seen somewhere before. And this is where it was. This is how stupid it was in the beginning for me. It was just, I've seen this. I know what yoga is, because I know that it's like I know it's from India. I know it's a part of this like long meditative or religious history, but like I've also, where have I seen this before in images of like being at Target in the DVD section, and seeing like videos, like home yoga videos that you could do, popped into my head. And that was honestly about the extent to which I had never even taken a yoga class at this point. And that was about the extent to which I knew anything about yoga. Yoga started coming into my life in a similar seamless fashion. I ended up taking a yoga class in grad school a couple years after those experiences. Meditation started coming into my life, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it first happened just in a very sort of primal archetypal way in the ceremony itself, which leads me to believe, again, like, this is maybe my woo speaking, but, if you're listening to my astrology channel. So my feeling is that these are patterns, archetypal, ritualistic, ceremonial technologies that are they just exist. They're eternal, they're primordial. And I'm tapping into them somehow. And that's, I think many people who drink ayahuasca experience something like that. So at any rate, those are just some of the little experiences that ended up shaping both yoga and astrology for me. And what happened is I was starting to study both yoga and astrology more in a more focused manner. So I was getting up at sunrise when I was living later on in New York City, and I was going to yoga every morning in the yoga studio. I was doing Bikram for a while, if you know what that is. And other studios too, and stuff like that, and just getting into meditation and, as a daily practice, as a daily sadhana, because the ayahuasca had imparted to me the importance of doing something to maintain the clarified state of consciousness that the healing experiences of ayahuasca had delivered. It's like, you need to do something to maintain this. So, yoga had become a part of almost like, spiritual maintenance at that point. It was a necessity, really, because I'd also become a lot more sensitive and needed to like manage my energy, and was a lot more sober than I had ever been. So I was studying a lot of astrology during this time too. And this is how ayahuasca started to teach me astrology. And I'm just going to give a few examples because there's literally like way too many to count, and oftentimes too fast to even catalog. Okay, so for example, as I was studying my own chart or the charts of other people, what would often happen would be a planetary combination that I had been thinking about and maybe not understanding, or sitting there contemplating but not reaching any significant conclusions about, just feeling stuck with, would sometimes just organically appear. This is just one way in which ayahuasca would sort of help me along with astrology. So for example, I was really trying, in my chart when I was born, I have a Mars opposite Neptune. Mars is opposite to Neptune. Mars in Gemini, Neptune in Sagittarius. It's a broad opposition, but it's in my chart. And I was trying to understand it because some of the texts that I had read and the things that they said you might experience, I hadn't experienced any of them. And, that's the problem with textbooks in general, is that a textbook or a cookbook, is that a cookbook may list like a series of, descriptively or predictively accurate significations for a planet or planetary pairing, but they can't necessarily tell you, there's like an infinite number of ways that they can appear, right? So as many as there are unique people, places, things, and experiences. So it often gave me visuals or memories that would help me to understand, similar to the mandala with the moon. So for example, with Mars Neptune, I started seeing these elaborate images of the Crusades and missionaries and all sorts of almost like holy wars, wars in heaven, wars with the angels, all the archangels. It gave me visions of the kind of Joan of Arc themes and elaborate mandalas of like sacred warrior themes, right? So that's kind of Neptune, Mars. And I would be like, oh, right, like, wow, okay, that helps me understand Neptune, Mars. And in some ways it would show me like the martyr, the sacrificial martyr. It would show me Jesus on the cross. It would show me the light and dark side of a planetary combination, purely because it was something that I'd either been contemplating and then just kind of like, when you're thinking like, I've got to do something, or here's a better example. You're like, I got to remember the name of that song. I can't remember the name of that song. And so you're like, I can't remember it. Well, I know it'll come to me later. And then boom, later, the name of the song just pops up. If you had that happen. So ayahuasca would do that to me like constantly, like sometimes like 15, 20 times in a 4, 5, 6 hour ceremony. With things that I had backlogged, like little command keys I'd pressed, and the action had never been fulfilled with regard to planets or planetary combinations or certain kinds of archetypes I was reading about, but not grasping or fiddling around with, not really understanding on some level. Not that it would ever complete my understanding either. It would just kind of, because the understanding, the questioning continues always with astrology, but it would just have a way of kind of illuminating things, and oftentimes with these tapestries of like archetypal imagery. And that was like, just what a gift. I couldn't be more thankful for ayahuasca in that regard, because it helped me, for example, later in my career, I started writing in a certain fashion, which was to list the planetary combinations for the day by aspect, say the moon's aspects for the day, and then a long list of different archetypal images or themes or ideas or thoughts or whatever that might somehow fit with that archetypal combination. Now, when I took to YouTube, that writing style, which took a very long time for me, I'm not doing it as much any longer. But when you hear me do my videos and you hear me turning the archetype in lots of different ways and giving you lots of different examples, that specific understanding came through ayahuasca ceremonies and the way in which the medicine tended to illuminate many different sides of the archetypal jewel for me through these kinds of images. Interestingly, one of the people who also has a similar way of conveying information that I found a lot of resonance with during the same time is Richard Tarnas, the author of Cosmos and Psyche, who also did a lot of his research between human consciousness and astrology with in concert with LSD research. So I think that's really interesting as well. But at any rate, so like here's another example: Mars Neptune. Trying to understand Mars Neptune, I also then would have memories. This was one particular ceremony, was like all about Mars Neptune. Interestingly, right before this ceremony, I also had my best friend who had been there with me in Peru and was at this point in India studying yoga in an ashram. He came and saw me, and he gave me a Mars, a statue of that was associated with the god Mars in Vedic astrology. So I had this in my apartment and had been working through Mars issues, unaware of the fact that I had just been gifted a Mars statue as well. That was really, really interesting. So at any rate, I started seeing images of Mars Neptune in my biography. For example, growing up, I was a competitive swimmer. So like Mars opposite Neptune, the god of the sea and the god of competition and athletics. Also, I was always really charismatic and sort of as you can tell, like I've got that kind of holy roller feeling, that's just always been a mood that I've really loved. So it was images of my religious upbringing, of charismatic faith, of evangelism, of competitive swimming, of lots of different images that kind of started bringing to life that Mars-Neptune opposition and some of the more challenging sides of the Mars-Neptune opposition as well. For example, by this point in time, I had gotten clean from pretty, relatively speaking, compared to what some people go through. I had a relatively light opiate addiction, but I was, for about 1.5 years of my life, I was on and off from pain pills after getting them for a procedure that I had done, like a surgery that I had. So I also saw the Mars opposite Neptune as the desire to like dissolve my pain, to the Mars Neptune as the desire to sort of drown sorrows in this very what's the word for it, self-destructive act. And it went along with a lot of like partying and stuff. So it was that kind of like that same charismatic energy was there as part of like drug, sex, and rock and roll for a chapter in my life. So all of these memories would come up, and basically, you'd see, again, the jewel turning between these archetypal images and memories of my own life. And this is something that happened to me, I would say, every single ceremony at least a couple of times for probably like the greater part of the 10 years that I drank ayahuasca. I started into astrology maybe 3 years into drinking, and then drinking ayahuasca. And then from that point all the way until I stopped drinking ayahuasca, it was, like pretty almost every single ceremony, at least a few times, that these kinds of things would happen, or other things that, would be almost like too elaborate to explain. So there were other instances of this. For example, I'll just give you a few more examples. Like I have Mars in Gemini, so one of the things that I would see with Mars in Gemini were like whirling blades, like swords, like whirling and moving through like elaborate tapestries of like coded language, some of which was not like, as far as I know, it could have been like Elven. Like I don't know what it was, but just really beautiful. And also like Mars in Gemini was my interest in wordsmithing. It would show me like pictures of like a a forge and hammer. You know what I'm talking? The blacksmith type of the anvil. That's what I'm thinking of. And but in terms of like writing and words and images of myself at keyboards for like a huge portion of my life, or like writing in my journal since I was in like the 6th grade, and just stuff like that. So it was just like the imagery of wordsmithing, and also I was on the debate team and stuff like that in college. So this image of me at debate, like debate meets, that kind of thing. So there was some really beautiful like memories and images that went along with Mars and Gemini sometimes too. So a lot of these things were, how did they reinforce? Now there was that kind of learning, and then there was like just straight up lots and lots and lots of book learning at the same time. So the two were really a part of one another. And as I said, like I wasn't yet really deeply absorbed in yoga or yoga philosophy as much, but that eventually came. And I had some dear friends who were really absorbed in yoga, for whom the ayahuasca experience often would help them learn a completely new way, a completely better and more seamless way of getting into postures. Like I'm not kidding you. Like I was in a ceremony one time with a yoga teacher who learned how to get into scorpion pose. Like I don't know if you know what that is, but it can be like a really kind of contortionist, difficult posture to get into. And she just like after a ceremony was done, not during the ceremony, after it was, she was very open, and she was like, yeah, I just saw during the ceremony exactly what I was doing wrong. And that some energy shifted, I think, around a chakra. And then she just did it. I mean, she just like did it right there. So, and this is someone like I knew, and I know for a fact that they were nowhere close to getting into that pose. So it's an amazing thing that ayahuasca could do that kind of stuff for people. So of course, like I said, there will be a part 3 where I talk about some of the downsides to all of this, because I'm not trying to make it all roses. These experiences were often the most terrifying, difficult, harrowing, hard work that I've ever done in my life. And so you're kind of torn open by the experience at the exact same time. So at any rate, those are some of the ways in which ayahuasca pointed me toward astrology and then taught me astrology. Finally, this culminated during my Saturn return. I'm now just turning 39. So this is, just about 10 years ago that I full-time astrology since 2010. When I was a social worker, and I decided that I was going to leave my job to help manage a yoga studio. The yoga studio I got served the eviction notice of the yoga studio. And then very quickly after that, I decided it was not going to stick around. So I left. I started collecting unemployment. And then basically was, taking my first formal astrology class with my first formal astrology teacher, aside from self-study and ayahuasca, her name is Rebecca Gordon. She's really great. I've had her, still one of my good friends and colleagues. And so if you check out her work, she's been on Dr. Oz a bunch and stuff like that. So I was taking a class from her, and I was preparing to go on a book tour for the book that I had written about ayahuasca, which is called Fishers of Men, The Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest. And as I was like ready to do that, I was getting ready to do that. I was taking this class. I was collecting unemployment. I went to class with her. It was in Soho in New York City. I was living there at the time. And I got sick on the subway ride back to my apartment. Like I had a fever come on really strongly. And for, I think it was like 4 or 5 days, I was really, really sick. And the fever came and went, and it was like really, really bad. And then basically what happened was right after, the fever like wouldn't go away. And there was an ayahuasca ceremony that I could go to over the weekend. And my fever, it wasn't as bad as it was, but it was just like lingering, and I couldn't get rid of it. And I had this thought, like, I'll go drink some ayahuasca. Like I'll drink just a little bit and have ceremony and try to just clear this. And I would not do that again now. Like, and I didn't tell anyone that I was doing that, which was really stupid of me. But at any rate, so I went to the ceremony, drank some ayahuasca, ended up not even being able to stand up because I was so weak at this point. And this was also there was an eclipse. So this was a series of eclipses that were coming through Cancer and Capricorn over my sun and moon, which I was born under a lunar eclipse in Capricorn in my 9th house, and then Cancer in my 3rd. So the eclipses came back to this place in the sky roughly. And as they did that, and I was in this ceremony, I had this beautiful understanding that there was nothing I loved more than astrology, and there was nothing I wanted to do more than astrology, and that this opportunity of being unemployed and having a book tour coming up was going to provide me this was an opportunity that was being provided to me by circumstance, fate, chance, luck, God, whatever, and that it was up to me to give it a shot. So I felt just this incredible sense of inspiration, and because I had been in the closet about it, not thinking it was ever possible to earn a living doing it, and not thinking that it was a feasible career, thinking in fact that people trying to become astrologers were probably foolish, because of how difficult it would be to make it, a living. And no, the ayahuasca was like, this is what you love. There's no denying it. You can't deny what's in your heart. So I was like, okay. So the accepting that, my heart was filled with like just this very, very deep, intense sense of trust and love and relief that it was okay to love what I loved and do what I really wanted to do. And that I was going to give it a try and just see what came of it. The ayahuasca did not promise me greatness. It did not tell me I was going to have some kind of career. It did not say anything, just this is what you love and you should give it a try. So I was like, okay. And the fever broke. And those were returning eclipses to the one that I was born under. So that then a month later, on the day that my book came out, I launched Nightlight Astrology. And I started doing donation-based readings because the ayahuasca gave me a specific vision within a ceremony at one point during the interim between when I had that vision and got healthy again. And then when I started the business the next month, another ceremony came along where I had this memory of going to the University of Minnesota's dental school when I was a kid, because you could get cheaper or discounted teeth cleanings and dental procedures done from the students who were studying. And I got the vision that I would do that was the best model for me to try and build experience and a client base, was to, just put the word out there while I was on book tour, going on radio shows and speaking at bookstores all over the country and stuff like that. And that I would essentially just use my platform to tell people I'm an astrologer. I'm doing donation-based readings to gain more experience. I'd love to help you out if you want me to take a look at your chart. And so I did that for the first year of my practice, and it really took off. I had probably, about 500 readings that I ended up doing, different lengths and different settings and things like that. But I amassed a lot of experience by doing donation-based readings. And that model came from an ayahuasca ceremony as well. I also got the vision to open up medicine basically said, if you want to learn this more, you have to teach it, because by teaching something, you learn how to do it more. So I started a meetup group where I just facilitated and led basically like a study group for people who are brand new to astrology, and people donated to help cover the space of rent in Chelsea in New York City. And that gradually evolved into my 1-year program, and then eventually a 2nd-year program and a horary class, and all that evolved. And those were all completely donation-based classes that I started with. And to this day, I still offer sliding scale donation-based offerings, and really don't turn people away from my programs if they want to donate monthly because they can't afford the rates that I set. And that's because I'm just trying to, pay respect to the medicine and to, sort of that divine guidance that came through, and I wouldn't be here without. So I try to keep that spirit alive and try to keep this as an active service, try to make astrology education really accessible. I had the choice when I started doing this channel whether or not to monetize it through Patreon or something else. And I had been writing prior to YouTube, but and I decided to do a Kickstarter where I basically just say, look, I'm just going to make this all free. I'm not going to have like tiered levels of information or something like that. Like I have my classes and I have my readings, but the stuff I put out there in public, it's just totally free. And then at the end of the year, if you appreciate it, I hold out the hat and you can pitch in. And then I try to make everything at the end of the year. I also try to give you something back in return for your donation to support my content creation, my free content creation. So it's like, you get a reading, or you get, you can take one of my classes for significantly cheaper or something like that. So those are, that business model all came from ayahuasca. So that's how it evolved. And then, I met my wife in 2010. We started a donation-based yoga studio with basically the same exact principles of business. And we operated that all the way up until last September. So almost 10 years. And, and my wife works using the same model. She adapted to her herbal medicine practice and her herbal medicine apprenticeship programs. So that's how, in all of that, I have ayahuasca to thank for. So, a lot of what you get on my channel came directly from, ayahuasca experiences, or what ayahuasca instilled in me as the important, important daily habits or practices to have in order to be in the best position to continue receiving that inspiration and those fun insights that can make a cool video or whatever the case might be. So So that's the story. I hope you've enjoyed the second part. I look forward to making the third, in which I will talk about the benefits, maybe blessings and curses of working with psychedelics in general. I want to make sure that I do that one, because there did come a point for me where I finally said, thank you. I've received exactly what I needed. And now it's time for me to turn the chapter and focus on spiritual life without entheogens, without any kind of, altering my state through any kind of plant medicine or anything like that. So I'll talk about that in the third part, and I hope that you find this enjoyable. Please leave your comments in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, info@nightlightastrology.com. All right, take it easy, everyone.